Welcome. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our program on exploring the history of Missouri through art, which is presented by the Museum of Art and Archaeology. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager with the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. So today with us, once again, is Valerie Hammonds. We're very pleased to have her with us. She's a retired teacher of Latin, American, and World History, and now she's a docent at the Museum of Art and Archaeology at MU and at MU and Boone County Historical Museum, and a tutor for Literacy Action Corps of Columbia. We're very glad to have her here for this program, celebrating art and the history of our state, which just had its 200th birthday. So join me in welcoming Valerie.
Thank you, Lauren. Ready? Okay. Thank you, Lauren, for that introduction. Today, I'm going to talk about a mixture of art and history in the Bicentennial of Missouri that's just taken place this week, and using art in the state capitol building, the Museum of Art and Archaeology, and a couple of other sources that I have. I'm trying to keep it in chronological order, but the sometimes I've grouped it by artist or era. So we'll see. And let's see. Okay, so let's start off with a Louisiana Purchase. This map I thought was kind of good at showing what was what. In 1803, we have the United States here, the original states, and the United States now owns land all the way to the Mississippi River. And you can see territories that are waiting to become states. There's several different steps that you have to do in order to become a state. Before the 19th century, only American Indians occupied the area that is Missouri today. And this is Missouri here, with the Mississippi River and the Missouri River going here, but this is the Louisiana territory. There were a few French and Spanish had explored and settled in the area, and France had hoped to build an empire in the New World based on the 1682 claim by French explorer and fur trader René Lassalle. He claimed all of the territory drained by the Mississippi River and its tributaries. So you have the river going here and then all the tributaries. And so this land, no one ever knew exactly what it was claimed for France, named Louisiana for the French King Louis XIV. And you can see here that Spain had Florida, Texas, Mexico, the West, and in the Northwest, sort of contested area with Russia, England, and Spain. Then the British had Canada. So that's how it's kind of divided up at that point. But this map might be a little easier to look at and see what states were what. So France had this land, and then France ceded this land to Spain in 1762. And Spain then receded it to France in 1800. It's kind of like a board game of monopoly or risk. But the treaty was not put into effect until 1803. So the French had the territory back less than a month at the time of the Louisiana Purchase. At this point, the United States wanted access to the mouth of the Mississippi River, wanted access here. And also, I might note that many Americans had already crossed the river into Spain's and now France's territory. So that gives us a little background. This is a sculpture entitled Signing of the Treaty, and it is in Jefferson City between the Capitol and the Missouri River. Sorry, my mouse gets a little touchy. This is James Monroe, Robert Livingston, and this is the Frenchman, Francois Barbe Marbois, signing the treaty for the purchase. And I'll talk about the reason for the two dates of this sculpture. It was created for the Louisiana Purchase Exposition at the St. Louis 1904 World's Fair. It was originally made out of staff, which is plaster and fibrous material, for a temporary purpose. So that was in 1904. Well, they decided that they wanted to cast it in bronze. And by 1929, the original artist had passed away, so they had his wife's permission to do that. In 1803, President Jefferson sent Monroe to Paris to assist the U.S. minister, who was Livingston, in negotiating a commercial site for New Orleans. At this point, France, controlled by Napoleon, was desperate for money, fearing that they would soon be at war with Great Britain. And his advisors said that if Great Britain won, they would have North America anyway. So France offered the U.S. this deal of Louisiana for $15 million, which figures about 3 cents an acre, take it or leave it deal. Well, nobody was authorized to take it, but they knew it was too good to pass up. It would double the size of the United States. And so they took it and they called it a treaty. And when the Spanish had this land, they referred to it as Upper and Lower Louisiana, with Missouri being Upper Louisiana. And the United States kept this distinction for a while. So also in Jefferson City, we have the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial Monument by our local sculptor, Sabra Toll Mayer. And this is a model of the sculpture, and you see the date on it is June 4th, 1804. So that was their bicentennial, because that's when they started their trip, the Corps of Discovery, that Jefferson sent them on to look for a water route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, hoping the Missouri River would be the first link. And you have Lewis and Clark here, you have Clark's slave York, and you have the interpreter, George Trillard, and Lewis's Newfoundland named Seaman. And when you go to the state capitol, you see this monument. In the background is the Capitol building, and it's right there. So don't miss this monument when you go. It is wonderful. This piece is entitled President Jefferson Greeting Lewis and Clark, and it's in the Senate chamber in the Capitol building. When Lewis and Clark arrived back in St. Louis in September of 1806, that's what this is showing, they went to Washington, D.C., and this painting shows Jefferson greeting them on the porch of the White House. Jefferson is shaking Clark's hand because he had not met him, and Lewis is by Jefferson's side. Lewis had been Jefferson's secretary. And you have some of the friends who went along with them, and you have the Indians who came with some of their the characteristic products of the West. Once Missouri was a territory, the government met in St. Louis, but after they wrote the Constitution and Missouri became a state, they used this building in St. Charles from 1821 to 1826. You can go there today and visit this. Jefferson City was chosen as the location for the permanent state capital. There were 2 buildings that were built and used in Jefferson City, but when the second was destroyed by lightning in 1911, a new building was needed. And this is a photograph of the new Capitol building, the present one today, being built out of steel. Funds to build the new Capitol were obtained from a special election for bonds, and more funds were raised than was needed for the construction of the Capitol. Because these were bonds that had been levied for a special purpose, the money could not be used for anything except the building. And there was $1 million left over at this point, and that was 1917 when it was finished. And it provided for ornamenting the Capitol with works of art. They set up a Capitol Decoration Committee, and it was headed by Dr. John Picard, who was the head of the art history department at MU. And decisions were made for various works of art. They did this both inside and outside of the building till 1928. There are 33 artists represented at this building and more than 125 works of art with murals, paintings, sculptures, tapestries, decorative windows, and furnishings. So this is what the Capitol building looked like in 1917 when it was finished, and there's no decoration on it. And this is, this is what it looks like today. And it was almost all of it was completed in 1928. There's a little bit that's been added since then. They hired this English artist named Sir Frank Brangwyn because he was the best muralist in the world. He created the paintings on canvas in England and shipped them to the United States. His work is as follows. He did the upper dome panels showing 4 great historical periods of Missouri, and then 4 large panels in the lower dome that depict the elements of nature, water, earth, fire, and air, and 4 small panels that show man's use of these elements in education, art, agriculture, and science. And we'll just look at the upper dome ones with the historical periods. This is a photograph of Brangwyn working on one of those eras. This is the builders. So you can see the size and the size that it needed to be in order to be seen well from the floor. And this is where those are, at the 3rd floor of the Capitol Rotunda. And we're going to talk about these 4. I think it's such a beautiful building. It's just fun to walk in and look at it all and take it in. You can't do it in one setting either. All right, so this is the first one called the Historic Landing. It's Frenchman Pierre Laclede's landing in 1764 when he sought to establish a trading post. This is the voyagers coming upriver. The boat has approached its destination, which turns into St. Louis. You have one man out of the boat. You have Laclede back here with his hand raised in greeting, but you do have this fellow here with his hand on the gun. And you have the Indians looking on with curiosity. Their bright robes contrast with the blue of the river. And in the very foreground, you have irises, which are the fleur-de-lis of France. Next, we have the pioneers. This is the next historical movement when the pioneers came from the states in the East in the 17 and 1800s. They came in never-ending streams by boat, covered wagon, down the Ohio, up the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. The picture is dominated by a covered wagon emerging from the forest, and you have a mother with children who seem to be unconscious of any danger. The oxen are grazing, which means that they have stopped. And you have the armed leader in front with his blanket, powder horn, and rifle. And then you have the Indian showing him the way. And remember, these are allegorical. There was a lot of criticism on how the covered wagon wasn't exact and other things. And it just meant, his paintings meant to show you what was happening. And Brangwyn never did come to the United States. He had another artist, we'll see here in a minute, who was responsible for his canvases once they got here. Just amazed me that he never did come here to the United States. This is the third one, called the Homemakers. This is the era after the pioneer, the trapper, and the fur trader. The forest is being cleared for permanent settlement. In the lower left, you have a man with an adze, joined by another with a saw. In the upper left, you have a boy gathering fruit from the orchards, which Missouri will be known for. In the lower right, you have a hunter who's kind of gazing on the scene. And in the center, you have the mother with child, an apple in her hand. Was he suggesting Eve with this? Who knows? And then the last one is the builders. This is the busy scene dominated by the building of Eads Bridge. This is kind of the full circle. We've come back to St. Louis, where Laclede landed in 1764. Men are making steel. Cranes are being hoisting girders in place. Stevedores are unloading boats on the riverfront. And there's bananas, oranges, grapes shown in abundance. St. Louis is becoming a great artery of commerce. One of the criticisms of his work is that bananas did not arrive until 10 years after the bridge was built. They weren't bringing those in. He was the best muralist at the time. So this is what we have, and they're just beautiful. This artist who helped him, his name was Allen Tupper True, and he painted 16 pendentive murals that reinforced Brangwyn's images and carried the timeline forward to 1830. This is the most of any painting art of any artist. And this was, I thought, was interesting photograph, because this is True here in N.C. Wyeth, and we'll see some of his work later when they were students, just a picture of him. And I thought another one to show you the pendentives, what their shape is and their size. And this was True in his studio painting them. Brangwyn asked True to complete his paintings if he could not. So that was their agreement. This is the first one of True's paintings. It's labeled Aborigines, and I've forgotten if I've said this, but a lot of these are my personal photographs, which, like these are of True's. They're pretty easy to take photographs of. Some of them weren't as easy, so I had to use a book, and I've tried to note that when that happens. Dr. Picard had something to say about the artwork as it was being done, and one of the things he talked about with this painting was that it shows an Indian chief who might have been friendly to white settlers, a man of great honor, according to his wise, crafty, maybe cruel ways, but noble. This is in the same area. This is the Spanish governor. It symbolizes the king's representative who brought pomp and authority of the old world to the new. Remember that Spain controlled Missouri for much of the European settlement period, but they made no significant effort to recruit their own settlers, and it was often Spanish officers were in control and of the French. And again, we have a pioneer mother representing the sweet, capable pioneer mothers who have made all that is fine in the history of Missouri, according to Picard. Notice her husband probably is the one behind her with the oxen. And we're just going to look at 4 or 5 of these. Missionary explorer. He represents no particular religion, but it was probably a religious zealot with courage, conviction, and hardihood. And you see behind him the French fleur-de-lis flag, and that's the Spanish flag. And the last one I'll show you of True's work is the early rivermen. Picard said it represents the hardy, independent, happy men of the river. So I'm hoping they were indeed happy. They were the connection between the frontier settlement and the outside world via New Orleans. So these are called pendentives. And as you walk along the hallways in the Capitol building, you see what are called lunettes, like the half moon shape. And I'll show you three here about the Aboriginal people, the original people in Missouri, that you'll see them referred to as Osage or Osages. I thought that was interesting in my research. This painter is showing an Osage village with Osage people living in wigwams that are made of rushes, wild rushes that they gathered out of the swamps. They usually made their settlements along the river. And the use of light here is showing you what the Osage people are doing by the campfire. You have the light of the campfire that's reflected off of the faces, the wigwams, and notice how they are dressed. Our next one by the same artist. These are the hunters, and they are hunting deer along the river. You see the clouded sky that's brightly lit. George Catlin, who was a famous artist of people in the West, especially the Indians, said that the Osage were large and well-proportioned people, and many of them were over 6 feet in height. So you look at the men here, they have their scalp lock in their buckskin clothing. By this time, when we have log cabins, this is the period when mainly the French have settled. They were hardy. They built their cabins on the edge of the wilderness. In this painting, there seems to be no threat to the settlers. And you look at the Indians on the right, they're no longer wearing scalp locks. They have on buckskins, coonskin caps, rifles, and powder horn. And again, all these paintings were done in the 1920s in the Capitol building. So what I'm going to do for a couple of slides here is talk about Daniel Boone's connection. And we're going back east. This is actually George Caleb Bingham's painting. George Caleb Bingham was a famous Missouri artist in the 1800s. It's entitled Daniel Boone Escorting Settlers Through the Cumberland Gap. And part of the reason that I'm showing this is because I wanted to talk a little bit about how are the people getting west. And Daniel Boone is responsible for part of this because this gap had been available for thousands of years for herds of wild buffaloes and Indians to travel through it. And it was named for Prince William, Duke of Cumberland, who was the son of George II of Great Britain. And in 1775, Daniel Boone was hired by the Transylvania Company to widen the path through this gap, making settlement in Kentucky and Tennessee easier. So once you get to Kentucky and Tennessee, you get on the Ohio River. And that would take people to St. Louis from there. So this painting shows both Christian and classical iconography to celebrate westward expansion. You have Daniel Boone here. His stance is modeled after the Greek sculpture of the Spear Bearer by Polykleides. And you have the whole caravan emerging from what looks like a foreboding valley. It's dark. It's been difficult for them. It's sort of like Moses leading people to the promised land. And his wife, Rebecca, sits on a white horse with a shawl around her head and body, suggesting the Virgin Mary. So a map to show you once they get to the Ohio River, then they can get up the Mississippi to Missouri. The river makes a great highway as long as it goes your way. Going west in 1821, at the Missouri River was a starting point. They would start in St. Louis, load their boats take the wheels off their wagons, lash the wagons to boxes, wagon boxes to the deck of the steamboat, and then they would journey 300 miles to Franklin settlement, which served as a trailhead until there was too much flooding and the town had to move to what is today New Franklin. And from there, they went to Independence, Missouri, which was a trailhead for the Santa Fe Trail. But eventually, sandbars on the river made it too difficult, and they moved it next to Westport. And you can see all these trails here and where they start at rivers. The brown trail is the Santa Fe Trail. The green is the Oregon Trail. The red starting here is the Mormon Trail. So everything is funneling through Missouri. A reason why Missouri is important to the founding of this country. And I'm going to show you the next thing is how you get from St. Louis to Franklin if you didn't want to take the river. So here's St. Louis, and this is a map, compliments of the DAR from Kansas City chapter, to show us Boone's Lick Road. So you have St. Louis, and you get over here to St. Charles, and then you go to Warrenton, Danville, Fulton, get up to Columbia, and I think this is 63, and then to Old Franklin. So you could either take the river or a road. That's sort of the missing link, how you get over here. And then you go to Kansas City's here with Independence and Westport, and then on to the trails. Back to the Capitol, this is another lunette. This is Boone's Lick Spring, and it's the sons of Daniel Boone making salt. And this is in 1807 because Daniel Boone passed away like right before we became a state in 1820. So he had been here for a while. I've read various sources about this salt lick. Some say the Boones owned it. Some say that they didn't. A man named James McKay was the owner. And prior to the Boones running it, it was called McKay's Lick. Anyway, it turns out that Nathaniel Boone and his brother Daniel Morgan Boone operated this salt lick out of the Boone's Lick Spring, and they were producing salt and using almost a quart of wood a day. It was close to Arrow Rock. They packed the salt and loaded it on a keelboat owned by their partners and shipped it to St. Louis to sell for about $2.50 a bushel. The path from their home in St. Charles to the salt lick became a prominent thoroughfare and linked the Cumberland Pike or National Road that had started with the Cumberland Road, Cumberland Gap in the east. And today it's pretty much either Highway 40 or I-70 takes this trail that they used. This is a piece at the Capitol that is in the Senate chamber. It's called Daniel Boone at the Judgment Tree. It depicts Boone, you see him seated here with a rifle across his lap, near Defiance, Missouri, where their home was. Boone, disappointed by reverses in Kentucky, accepted an offer by the Spanish, who then controlled the territory. He was given land and the title of syndic or commandant of the Femme Osage district, which gave him multiple responsibilities of sheriff, judge, and jury. He could determine the kind of punishment that would be given to a person that he convicted in his court. This painting shows him holding court. You see the Spanish flag in the background. He's deciding the fate of the man who stands in front of him, whose arms are bound, and the man's wife is behind him in blue. Convictions would usually be a sentence of found guilty of whipping, several hours on a pillory, or you might be banished from the area. But when Boone was here, he was not in America. In the United States anymore. He was in Spanish-controlled land. So Boone went to a foreign country to do that, which I think is very interesting. A couple of books have pointed that out. Here we see the first steamboat on the Missouri River. It was called the Independence. It arrived at Franklin, May 28th, 1819. So you see the riverboat as it approaches the bank. They're setting off cannons and greeting. See the little girl at the top of the hill who's covering her ears, and the line of people that are up there watching it. An Indian is sitting, or Indians are sitting by the side a little more stoically. So it's here that is really starting a new era in river navigation. Part of the problem with the Missouri River is it was not very well controlled, and it was rather dangerous. A lot of riverboats didn't make it. And another era was the artery of trade, and this is where east meets west. Luneta at the Capitol. This bridge was first known as the Great Bridge and later as the St. Louis Bridge. Railroads were starting to be built in the 1850s and 60s, and St. Louis needed a bridge to cross the river that would allow steamboats to go underneath. So the trains would be on top and the steamboats could cross underneath. This bridge was built by James B. Eads, who had never built a bridge before. He constructed the first all-steel bridge in the country. He saw steel as lasting longer and strong and being stronger than iron, which was the preferred bridge material at the time. So it's a double-deck bridge that spans 6,220 feet. And then it has center spans that would allow for steamboats to go under. He used a cantilever construction to assemble the spans. It was one of the first bridges in the country in which pneumatic caissons were used to place the piers on bedrock. It was begun in 1867, finished in 1874, cost $10 million. This is the painting that's from the Illinois side, looking at the skyline in St. Louis, and it shows all kinds of river life going on with a train down there, railroad, steamboats, ferries, tugs, and all that. And this is the lunette that, as you walk past it and look at it, it changes orientation. So it's kind of fun. Another thing that Missouri was known for were their mines. This is entitled Riches from the Mines. The French opened mining in 1720 in eastern Missouri. This artist shows a picturesque scene, but in reality, it's pretty bleak. You see in the front right, a cave-in. Beyond it is a dumping pile. In the center is a sluggish stream, and behind it are just nondescript mining buildings. Southwest Missouri was the leading mining producer, world leader for 2 centuries. We were known for that. Another thing we were known for is the Pony Express. This lunette shows a dispatch rider starting a journey that would see mail delivered more than 1,000 miles west to Sacramento, California. It was started in St. Louis, Missouri. It lasted less than 2 years, but long enough to become a legend. What stopped it was when the telegraph was established in 1861, and they could telegraph information instead of having to write it. The painting is packed with detail. In the upper left, you see a steamboat that's out there on the Missouri River, and beyond it can be seen the Kansas shore. On the upper right, above the man's silk hat, was the old courthouse in St. Joseph that the artist was told was still standing in 1862 when Pony Express was doing. And the scene is pretty well balanced. You have the dogs running after the horsemen, but on the right you have 3 people in the corner, on the left you have 3 people in the other corner, making it pretty symmetrical. So for about a year and a half, Pony Express. Another thing that happened in Missouri were battles of the Civil War, and the artist N.C. Wyeth was a prominent book and magazine illustrator, and he wanted to be known as a painter, not an illustrator. So when he had this opportunity offered him by the commission, he grabbed it. He was to paint 2 paintings of the Civil War in Missouri. So he painted one with the Confederate victory and one with Northern victory. So this is Wilson's Creek near Springfield. It was the scene of a Confederate victory early in the war, 1861. General Sterling Price versus General Nathaniel Lyon. Lyon had been denied additional troops and told to pull back to Rolla, but Lyon decided to hold Springfield and launched a surprise attack. Lyon was killed and his forces went ahead and pulled back to Rolla the next day. The Confederates were not able to pursue them. This battle was significant because the number of dead exceeded the number suffered by Americans in any single battle of the Mexican War, which had been fought earlier. On the right, you see Confederate General Sterling Price leading his men from the front. It was masterly use, the painter's masterly use of light and shadows and small details like the scars from bullets on the tree. It invites the viewer to hear the sounds of gunshots, the yells of the men, the cries of the wounded, to feel the suffocating heat of that August day. One survivor said it was like fighting in a furnace. About 20,000 men took part in this battle, and there were about 2,500 casualties. And the other painting that N.C. Wyeth wrote did was the Battle of Westport, also known as the Gettysburg of the West. It was a final blow to the Missouri Confederacy. It ended General Price's last effort to recapture Missouri. He had worked his way west, pursued by increasing numbers of federal forces. He found he was caught between them and 15,000 federal soldiers coming from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So he made his stand between the Little Blue and the Big Blue rivers in the Kansas City area. It was a 3-day battle. The Union Army seized the high ground and forced the Confederate to retreat. The original painting that Wyeth did was of 2 large figures on horseback fighting each other, and it was rejected. So the second one points out both the struggle of the battle and the greater scale of the scene. It's like the split second before the battle began. You can see the little stream between the armies. It's realistic in style, but it's not realistic in life because the horses apparently really wouldn't charge each other like this. Another piece that has to do with the Civil War in Missouri is General Order Number 11 by George Caleb Bingham. This is the painting. There are actually 2 of them, and this one is at the Missouri State Historical Society. The title was a Union Army directive issued during the Civil War on August 25th, 1863. It forced the evacuation of rural people in 4 counties on the state line between Missouri and Kansas, regardless of their allegiance. Those who could prove loyalty to the Union could stay in a fort, and those who couldn't just had to leave. And you have General Thomas Ewing seated on his horse watching the Redlegs make the people leave. And you see this whole line of people who are taking what they can with them, and they know that when they return is going to be to nothing. Which I found this interesting picture. It's in the Pleasant Hill Post Office mural. This is back home in 1865. this is what families would have found had happened to their homestead. Have to start over from scratch. Next, there's a collection that the museum has called The Heart of the Nation. And I picked just a few of these to show why Missouri is important. This collection was commissioned by the Scruggs Vanderbilt Barney Department Store of St. Louis in 1946, right after World War II. And it was donated to the university in 1950. In order to broaden the economic base for art, the head of the Associated American Artists in New York City approached the president of the department store and proposed a collaborative project. They worked together to commission a collection of almost 100 paintings depicting contemporary Missouri. And so it wasn't 100 artists who went out and did this, but it was quite a few artists who did these paintings. This idea worked well because at the time, art and business observers wanted fine art and commercial art to merge. And so signed prints of these works were available for purchase for as little as $5. So you could have the signed prints hung up in your home. 3 other department stores in different states took on this project, but the Heart of the Nation is the only one that was not disassembled and scattered to the winds. As I said up here, it was donated to the university in 1950, and it was in Jesse Hall in offices and on the walls until the collection of 19 paintings were moved to the Museum of Art and Archaeology in 2014. So one of the pieces that I wanted to show you from that is called Drilling and Loading Lead and Zinc Ore in Joplin. And these were all done in 1946, 1947. Lead deposits in the Joplin district are great in depth, varying from 350 to 800 feet. Because of this, nearly all lead mining is done in shafts, tunnels, and outlets. The lead is broken into slopes by blasting. It's mechanically shoveled from the floor of the mine and loaded into mine cars. From there, it's taken to the hoist cages. It's very dangerous work. This is called planing mill. The lumber is sawed and dressed down in both permanent and itinerant saw and planing mills in the Ozarks. Missouri is known for its forests. When the Europeans arrived in the Missouri area, about 2/3 of the land was covered with forest. Lumbering on a big scale began in the late 1880s and was done on the cut and get out policy nationally prevalent in those days. Today, reforestation is bringing back the timber resources of our state. And a little one to show you about railroads. This is 8 a.m. Union Station, St. Louis. At one time, more trains bound to more diverse destinations left Union Station daily than from any one railroad station in the country. St. Louis was a crossroads of America, making it a natural for railroad development. So again, another reason Missouri is important. And then this is called rabbit trapping near Nixa. Rabbit trapping was a good source of food and pocket money for many boys, farm boys. They first used homemade box traps, but then this changed to steel traps. And lastly, I'm going to show you the Thomas Hart Benton mural, sort of reviews a lot of what we've been talking about. The following slides are either from the internet, my personal photos, or this wonderful book called The Art of Missouri Capital, History in Canvas, Bronze, and Stone by Bob Pretty and Jeffrey Ball. It's a lovely, lovely book, weighs about 5 pounds, and it's just full of information. Pretty also wrote the book, Only the Rivers Are Peaceful, his Benton's Missouri mural. And when you go there and see that mural, or just look at it in the slide show, you just know that really the way Benton painted, only the rivers are peaceful. This is the way the house lounge looked before Benton's mural. Many of these furnishings are still there today, and we'll kind of see them. It's flocked wallpaper. And I just did a small thing. So look at the chairs, and this is the flocked wall. This is the entrance door to the lounge. This is one of the side doors. And then I found this. When you look at this, the house members were upset because they used to come to this lounge to rest, recuperate from things. And so then once they get this, it's like, yikes, they'd never be able to rest again. So I can understand how they felt, but it's just beautiful. We're lucky that it's there. Okay, this is a photograph of Benton painting the lounge, so you can get an idea of the size. And this first section is early Missouri, shows settlers pulling their boats up the Missouri, building their houses, their log cabins, breaking the sod, shooting, moving, trading with the Indians. And one thing about Benton, when he was hired to do this mural, he spent 18 months going all over Missouri sketching people from the state. And he, above each door, he would put a panel here. And this is from Huckleberry Finn. And this is when Huck and Jim have a close call with the steamboat. You can see here it says the Sam Clemens. And many faces in this mural are Missourians. In fact, Jim's is. The man who posed for this name was Rotha Williams, and he was on the mop crew at the state capitol building. And Benton saw him, thought he had a very interesting face, asked if he could sketch Mr. Williams. And Mr. Williams said yes to it. And he said that Benton just had like a scrap of paper in his hand and did the sketch. And Benton had said, come back later and see yourself. And he did. Williams did. And he was very proud to be here on the mural. The second panel shows, over here on the left, that communities are being built. Social structures are coming up. This is the first Capitol building in St. Charles. This is the historic Catholic Cathedral on the St. Louis River. And this building back here is the previous Capitol building in Jefferson City, the one that burned down. So in the next one, you're seeing social development, but this state is still a frontier state. You have the man with his hunting dogs, but you're having towns here. You're having political rallies. The face of this person is Benton's father's face. He had been dead for 10 years, but this was to honor his father there. And these little boys arguing over a watermelon were Benton's nephews. He's showing the role of women, housewives, homemakers. One of the criticisms of the mural was the naked baby's butt there. And Pretty, in his book, says that this man was Harold Brown Jr. And when Pretty wrote Only the Rivers Are Peaceful book in 1989, this man was still alive. Up here you see the long dark cloud with fires and all, so that's precursor to the Civil War. And one fun thing is this Benton says this was his only mistake that he made. He put a cow's tail on a mule. Above the entry door is Jesse James robbing trains and banks, and Benton sketched Jesse James' grandson for Jesse James. So here we have 20th century modern farm. It's highly mechanized, but it still requires a lot of physical effort in it. We have a farmhouse here with a coal stove. The first power line in rural Missouri was strung in July of 1937, and Benton started this mural in June of 1936 and finished it in December of 1936. So now we see a new cloud, and it's from pollution, factories giving off pollution, and you can see a tractor here that's belching smoke into the skies. Here we have a typical county courthouse. It's modeled after his hometown, Neosho. There's a courtroom scene, and this face is Benton's brother, Nat Benton, who was a lawyer. Then we have mining towers and slag heaps. And this section right here, this is on the far wall. This is representing St. Louis, which is known for brewery workers, shoemakers, office products, Union Station Tower up here. Women are now out in the workforce. And on the right-hand side of that wall, we have Kansas City, known for its pharmaceutical industry. And then here is the cattle processing operations. Over here, we have the Nelson Atkins Museum. And you have a woman taking some kids to the museum, and she has to take them by some unemployed people who are getting warmed by a fire. Remember, this is the Depression still. And you have the Liberty Memorial, World War I Memorial. You have a businessman lunch with Pendergast there. He had some criticism for the lack of clothing on these dance hall girls. And he said, actually, they had on less than he portrayed in here. And we don't want to forget this over this door. This is a world famous ballad about Frankie and Johnny, about a famous killing in St. Louis in the red light district in 1899. Frankie was mad. She shoots her man with a .44, and his new girlfriend is looking on while two patrons are trying their best to get out. And lastly, I'll give you a close-up of the statue of Ceres, the Roman goddess of grain, agriculture, fertility. She holds a sheaf of grain in her left hand, and her right hand is extended forward and down in a perpetual blessing. This is on the Capitol Dome. When the Capitol building was restored and was going through restoration in 2019, the statue was removed for the first time in 94 years. It was sent to Chicago to be restored. They found no structural problems, no corrosion. They said the bronze was a very good quality of bronze. It had probably been struck by lightning more than 300 times. In 1924, when they first put it up, they used a winch on top of the dome and tied ropes to an elm tree on the lawn for hauling the three pieces up. Today, they used a 500-ton crane for that. So I thank you for attending today, and I will stop sharing, I guess, or should I just stop the PowerPoint?
You can end the share, I think, so we can see you to ask some questions. If you have questions for Valerie, go ahead and type those in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can give you permission to unmute your microphone if you prefer to ask questions that way. I love the Benton murals. That I remember as you're touring the Capitol on more than one occasion, just being struck by them. But there was a little bit of controversy around them when they were installed, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little bit about that?
They wanted to whitewash them. And and they were all in a fury about it because of a different problem, because he was showing slavery and what they did to the Mormons and the Civil War and all. And Benton said, they're not going to admit that they gave me $16,000 to do this, and they're going to have to whitewash it. He said they'll never agree. So thank goodness they did.
Yes. Yeah. And did he do a lot of studies beforehand? You mentioned the sketch of the Capitol worker, but I mean, just to represent so many people.
He did. And in this book, the Rivers Are Peaceful, he talks about how those studies are in storage in Kansas City, like in an underground thing. I think that they have them all there because he was from Neosho, but he ends up living in Kansas City once he does all these other things in his life, and had a studio there, and also that's why his work. So, yes, big thing to prepare that wall for his work. And he said the book, he did a 5-ply wood was built, and then they put linen on top of it. And then they had this, what's called caisson glue, covered with 7 coats of white chalk. So that's what he was painting on, was white. And that little picture that we saw of him with it, that's what, and he would paint a section at a time, and he used eggs in his paints he'd bring a bag of eggs every day to make it fresh. And sometimes it was so hot because he started in June, so he was doing it in the summer. It was so hot that his paint wouldn't stick to his brush. And he had to come real early in the morning to get it started.
Wow.
Just a whole bunch of, a whole book worth of information on it.
We have a question. Can you tell us about Audrey Munson, thought to be the model for series, is that the sculpture?
Yes. My talk was too long, so I had to take off some things. So she was one of the things that I thought was interesting. She was the 1915 exposition girl, and she was a favorite model for New York sculpture community. Her face and figure appeared on dozens of public and private sculpture. She starred in 4 motion pictures and made history as the first actress to appear nude in mainline movie theaters.
Wow.
There you go.
The Heart of the Nation collection. Can you say a little bit more about that? I know that there were some of them were on display at the museum within the last couple of years. How that project came about.
That was a department store, the Scruggs Vanderbilt department store in St. Louis, and they were approached to have artists just go around the state. And the curators at the museum say they're not great works of art. Some of them I think are really great and lovely, but they're important because they represent the state and what was going on at the time. And I think the artists were pretty much given free rein. They might have asked for a certain area, or maybe they were told go to this area and do the paintings. But we were very fortunate to have them together because I think at least 3 other states did this, and there was no place to keep them. And there are 98 of them, so the museum can't put all of them out at once. They try to have a show every once in a while for a few of them.
Well, I would encourage our viewers that if they see an exhibit of those publicized, it is an interesting snapshot of the artists working at the time, and then also just the way Missouri looked at the time.
And Lauren, the engineering department at the university has done a virtual tour of this, and I didn't get to take it. last weekend. They had it at Jesse Hall and some talks about it. I didn't get to do that, but you'd have to put on the goggles and all, and I didn't get that experience. So hopefully that will be present at the museum at some point when the museum reopens, and we can lead tours of the artwork.
And Barbara Schneider has her hand raised. We've got time for one more question. I'm going to go ahead and Barbara, if you want to unmute yourself.
I did get a chance to do that virtual tour at Jesse Hall last week, and it's really wonderful. It's so much fun to do. You really have to. You get to. You put these glasses on, and it's as if you are in a museum with all those paintings hanging on the walls, and you can walk from room to room and look at them. And then there's a little there's something that highlights like the title of it and the information about the picture. It's really wonderful. I don't know whether is it available? Like, I don't know if it's going to be available again, but I imagine it will be.
I think I agree, Barb. I think the museum will have some sort of goggles so that you can see it, but it might not be anytime you walk in. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Barb. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're out of time. I have a lot more questions, but I will just have to try to answer them myself. One of the books that Valerie mentioned is, and I put in a link in the chat, The Art of the Missouri Capitol. Pretty was the author of that. And so we do have copies of that available for checkout if you're interested, because there are so many works. And then the Archaeology Museum, they hope to have it reopened in mid to late 2020. Their website, I'm putting that in the chat now if you want to stay tuned and check back there. Valerie, I want to thank you for putting together this presentation. This is a really fun tour to celebrate the history of our state. And I can give a little plug. You're going to be giving a longer version of this for Osher, correct? In the fall. So if you want to look out for that in Osher's catalog, that would be great. And if you want to check out recordings of past library events, you can visit our page dbrl.org/events and look under recently live. And this presentation will be there after our magical PR department has had a chance to edit it. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Enjoy the weather.